right, I think that's our cue. I think we are live and ready to start our meeting. This is the Budget Committee meeting, first of 2022. And Debbie, why don't you note attendance, and let's do a logistical check and make sure Astrid, who I believe is on remotely, can hear us okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Indeed, thank you. All right, so we really have a couple of sort of housekeeping items to start with. The first is we're going to make sure everybody had a chance to take a look at the Budget Committee procedural rules and related documents. They were on board book. Anybody have any questions? Everybody get a chance? Head nods, yeah. Okay, we won't spend a lot of time on that. We are going to then move to the next item, which is to elect chair and vice chair. And the practice that we did last couple of times, I think, worked pretty well. And so what we'll start with is a discussion by which we will solicit nominations. And for anybody nominated, of course, they have the opportunity to say no thanks. And so once that happens, we'll open it up for discussion. And then we'll proceed out of discussion into motions and votes. We will begin with chair. When chair is elected, chair will take over and proceed, I guess, however they see fit to elect the vice chair. So that's how I'm planning to proceed here. So at this point, I would open up the discussion for nominations regarding Budget Committee chair for this committee year. One more thing I'll mention is historically it is not a board member that serves as chair. So historically we have done it where a non-sitting board member has served as chair.
I'm unfamiliar with the responsibilities, but I'm fine doing it. I'll put that out there.
All right, I nominate Matt.
Perfect. So we have a nomination and somebody who's willing. Anybody else either willing or would like to nominate anybody? Might be real easy. All right.
I'll second that.
So let's move into the next phase, since nobody else is stepping forward or asking to be considered. So with that, we do have one person who has agreed, and I guess then, Jennifer, did you make a motion? Yeah, and you seconded it, so we're gonna move and second it, and I guess we will ask for any discussion, if there is any. No? With no discussion, we'll move quickly. Debbie?
Janet.
Yes.
Tom.
Aye.
Lynn.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Wally.
Yes.
Stephanie.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Ashton. Ashton, can you hear me?
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Robin.
Yes.
All in favor.
All right, congratulations.
Thanks.
One more quick thing before I officially pass it off, because I forgot to do it. I did mean to welcome our new committee members. That was on the beginning of my list. And so this year we have 4 new ones, more than normal. We've got Wally and Matt and Blinn and Stephanie. And so welcome and thank you. Appreciate you guys serving. All right, so now I'm going to pass the gavel, the virtual gavel, over and allow you to proceed. Basically, we're going to follow the agenda, which is on your, yeah, you've got it open in front of you. And you can proceed how, I guess, however you would like with the election of vice chair, and I'll be quiet now.
I like the flow of that. Any nominations for vice chair? I need help, so.
I'm gonna nominate Jennifer Trigger.
Oh, gosh. Sure, I'll do it, but somebody else can do it too.
Okay, partial willingness. Anyone else?
Would Wally be interested in?
Yeah, Wally's got experience.
I could do that.
Let's
Okay.
retract my nomination.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll go with Wally. I guess Debbie, go through, we need a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, second from Tom.
Janet.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Lynn.
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Wally,
Yes.
Stephanie,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Ashton, Jennifer,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
all in favor.
Very good.
All right, superintendent's budget message.
Thank you, Matt and Wally, for volunteering for that. That makes it go a lot smoother. I'm gonna read my budget message now. Good morning, good evening, members of the Silverfalls School District Budget Committee. Tonight, we present you, the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022-2023. Last year, when I presented this message, I spoke of unknowns due to it being the first year of a new biennium, questions surrounding enrollment totals, and several other issues related to the ongoing pandemic. Tonight, we know quite a bit more about those issues and the related impact on the district's finances. This is not to say that we no longer face uncertainty, but rather do you want to turn that down, Daniel? Testing. Is it already? I guess it's turned down now.
Yeah.
Let me back up. This is not to say we no longer face uncertainty, but rather the level of uncertainty has diminished. In a few minutes, our finance director, Steve Nielsen, will go into greater detail. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to run you through a high-level overview of the 2022-23 proposed budget. It would be impossible to discuss our budget or budgeting process without a clear focus on our district's strategic plan and its 3 goals. Number 1, each student is on track to graduate every year. Number 2, each student has the social and emotional learning skills to navigate their world. And goal number 3, facilities reflect our love and respect for our students. The proposed budget continues to tie directly to the first 2 goals of that plan, and I'll address the 3rd goal later in this message. When I spoke to the Budget Committee last year, our educational environment and service offerings looked very different than they do today. Still in the midst of only half-capacity schooling, our students and teachers were struggling. In the face of those struggles, some families unenrolled their students and sought alternative options such as private schools, home schools, and co-ops. Many districts around the state deal with fluctuating enrollment numbers and therefore fluctuating funding all on a regular basis. Silverfalls School District has been fortunate for many years to have had steady or slightly increasing enrollment and thus steady or increasing funding levels. This year, having reopened a full 5-day weeks of school, we could not predict how many of those unenrolled students would return. They represent approximately 10% of our total pre-COVID student population. Unfortunately, as of today, that number has not changed. To be clear, this is not to say that none of those families re-enrolled, but rather that the overall picture of our enrollment remains at a number approximately 10% lower than our pre-COVID numbers. This reduction in enrollment has a direct impact on our funding. However, I want to make clear that in line with our first and second goals, we remain committed to ensuring every child in our district has the opportunity and support they need to make up for the learning gaps they experienced as a result of the pandemic. In just this first year of full school schedules since the pandemic began, we've seen students making great progress. We've used the funds made available to us throughout the pandemic to embed flexible programs into our day-to-day practices. More importantly, we are now finishing year 2 of a 5-year plan to implement a guaranteed, viable, and standards-based curriculum for all students in Silverfalls School District. This strategy enables us to promote and protect equitable educational practices by providing every one of our students with universal access to high-quality curriculum, assessment, and instruction, and as a result, equitable educational outcomes. It's critical that the district maintains a balanced and sustainable budget while holding a minimum general fund reserve of 10% per board policy. The impacts of the pandemic have created a great deal of flux and constant change over the past 2 budget cycles. Current resources and requirements do not align, and the general fund's ending balance has fallen below 10%. Our goal is to meet the 10% threshold once again, no later than June 30th, 2025. The 2022-23 proposed budget is balanced, but it relies on the final $1.5 million of the federal ESSER stimulus funds. ESSER funds are a temporary revenue source, which have been used to support online curriculum, technology, personal protective equipment, and other COVID safety requirements, unfinished learning, and sustainability of operations. These funds will be fully expended by June 30th, 2023. This is referred to as a funding cliff, as you can see on the slide above here and here. The gap left by these funds must be filled by increasing sustainable resources and/or by decreasing expenditures. While the district has already taken steps to reduce costs through various measures, further belt tightening is required as we budget for 2023-24 and beyond. As superintendent, I remain committed to protecting jobs. We have not yet reached the point, nor do I necessarily believe that we will reach the point where we will be forced to lay off employees in order to balance the budget. This is not to say that our staffing levels today or next year will be the same as those pre-pandemic. In fact, we have seen an overall reduction in general fund staffing levels in line with declining student enrollment and in line with most every other employment sector across the economy. However, we've managed this by re-examining specific needs as natural employee turnover, which is also called employee attrition, occurs, as well as by asking our administrative team to creatively think about the way specific roles are filled, tasks accomplished, and students supported. What we're talking about here can be thought of as right sizing. As specific programmatic needs and funding levels shift, so too can staffing levels. A funding level decrease does not necessarily equate to a decrease in the quality of a program. Indeed, it often means we've found better or more efficient ways to deliver service. To date, no one in Silverfalls School District has lost their job or been laid off due to a decrease in funding. To understand why this is the case, I offer you a metaphor, and that's up here on the screen as well. If you think of the stars in the sky, historically, the general fund has been like the sun. Just as the sun is the world's main source of light, our general fund has been our main source of funding. Now, however, we live in a budgeting world where the sun has gotten about 10% smaller. Fortunately for us, before the world could start to feel a bit dim, a number of other stars in the sky have appeared and are shining brighter than ever before. These new sources of funding, some temporary or short-term, some long-term or permanent, are making up for much of the light lost due to the sun's shrinking. I spoke to the one-time federal ESSER funds above, which have helped us weather the COVID storm. In addition, the state has added several new funding sources outside of the general fund budget over the past several years. The Oregon School Investment Account, or SIA, and Measure 98 funds provide roughly $4 million per year, and these funds have allowed the district to expand services and programs throughout targeted spending of money earmarked for those purposes and in alignment with the district's strategic plan. There are many other grant programs as well, and our Director of Teaching and Learning, Leslie Roach, will speak to this in greater detail a bit later this evening. Outside of the conversation around the district's operational budget, and in line with our strategic goal that all facilities will reflect our love and respect for our students, our long-range facilities planning committee wrapped up their work just a few months ago. As part of that work, we also engaged in 7 K-8 listening and learning sessions. From these sessions, we wrote a report that will stand the test of time in this district, and which includes the vital and necessary answers to a decades-old question: what do our K-8 communities want for the future of their schools? Additionally, we are conducting listening sessions at Robert Frost and Mark Twain Elementary Schools in May, and we'll be holding similar sessions for Silverton Middle School and Silverton High School this fall. With the K-8 report in hand and the work of our Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee completed, we can now say with certainty that the Silverfalls School District community must pass a general obligation bond in order to address the dire facilities needs across the district. The average age of the facilities in our district is over 60 years old, and we know that we have many significant facilities repairs, upgrades, or replacements in our future. Last year, I told this committee that we do not have a timeline yet for such a bond. Today, I can tell you that my hope is to place a bond measure on the ballot in the calendar year 2023, pending school board discussion and approval, with the goal of replacing Silverton Middle School and performing significant repairs or renovations on every other school in the district. I cannot overstate that the longer we wait to address our facilities needs, the more expensive they will become. As the saying goes, the best time to resolve these issues was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. We continue to hear from our community that the goals of our strategic plan represent what they want to see from their school district. The budget you'll see tonight represents great work from very bright people who have worked through issues facing our district and have come to conclusions that represent both a path forward as well as a stable foundation from which we can build the future of education in our communities for generations to come. I want to express my sincere appreciation for them, as well as for your willingness to be here and to work through this process with us. And for that, I say thank you again. And Steve, I believe I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Scott. I'm gonna come over here. I kinda like to stand up when I need to get the mic. Or else people won't be able to hear me online. Thanks, Scott, for delivering the message. Was this working? There we go. I got to hold it up like this. First of all, I just want to say the budget message, which is really part of the proposed budget document, as well as this PowerPoint presentation, will be posted on Board Book tomorrow morning on the agenda link, so everyone will be able to see it. I first just wanted to start by thanking Kim Dowd, our controller, and Sharon Etzel, who I know is online. Thank you both for all your help. This document wouldn't exist without them. So, and Debbie and Daniel for all their help getting everything ready as well. So, I apologize in advance. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, you're going to get a lot of information, sit and get style from myself, and then Leslie will end it. But then I promise we'll turn the rest of the evening over to you all and public comment. So we'll get going here. So this, I know Jonathan addressed, this is just a little information on the timeline, and, well, this is the presentation objectives, but this is the timeline for the budget. We do have our second meeting scheduled for 3 weeks from tonight, May 19th, and just the day before that second meeting, the next quarterly economic forecast will come out from the state, and the goal will be that by state law, the budget must be passed by June 30th of each year. So the goal would be to be able to approve the proposed budget as presented or amended out of this committee to the 7-member school board for the June board meeting. So we can have as many meetings between now and then as the budget committee would like. In addition, we do have, as we did 2 years ago, coffee hour opportunities. These are not official budget committee meetings, and therefore no more than 6 budget committee members could be present, or no more than 3 board members. And the public is welcome, of course. Everyone is welcome. But I would ask you, if you'd like to attend, I'd love to have you come. Please just email me. There'll be the week of May 9th, 2 at the district office and 1 virtual. I've already gotten a couple of emails about that. So thank you for that. This is just a couple slides with the link to the OSBA reference on budget committee roles and responsibilities. And something new that I haven't included before, but I know Wally, Matt, Glenn, and Stephanie, thank you for serving. And usually we would have had enough time to have had a new budget committee member orientation. We did, for various reasons, weren't able to do that this year, but that's one of the reasons for the coffee hour, but also just to be able to provide more information and answer your questions through the process for everybody. But the end result of this whole process is the school board adopting basically a one-page resolution that adopts the budget, levies the taxes, both for our permanent rate for the operations as well as to pay our school bond obligations, general obligation bond, and to appropriate the funds for the year. And it's rolled up to a pretty high level, which is why we have this process. So you have a notebook in front of you with over 100 pages. That breaks down every fund, function, object with this year's budget, last year's budget, and 2 years prior actual, so you can see exactly where all the funds are going. Because when you look at something like this, it's a pretty high level document. But by Oregon law, this is what's ultimately adopted by the school board. The other thing, and I don't expect you to be able to read this on here. This is just a screen snip here of the resolution. The bottom of the resolution, one thing that budget committee members don't know many times is when you approve the budget to the board for adoption, the general obligation debt service amount, which last year was a little over $4.3 million to pay the debt service on the general obligation bond, that's part of your motion for approval. And that could not be done without passing through the 14-member board. In fact, if we ever had to come back and say we needed to make a change to that number before we pass that levy amount onto the county July 15th, we would have to bring the budget committee back to amend that amount. So that's a really important part of the adoption process as well. I wanted to provide a little bit of background on where we've been the last 25 months. So it's just hard to believe. I was mentioning to a few of you as you walked in, this is our first live budget committee meeting since April or May of 2019. The last 2 years have taken place completely virtually. And so much has happened. It's been a roller coaster ride, as you all know, not just here in the school district, but in everyone's personal lives. So especially with new members, I want to just kind of recap where we've been. First of all, our primary objectives, as Scott highlighted in his budget messages, first and foremost, that we're budgeting to the strategic plan. And we showed that slide a little bit earlier, highlighted those three points. That current resources or revenue and current requirements or expenditures are aligned to, so that we're not using reserves, but we have been. And then sustainability. A sustainable budget is always what we're after. And the last 2 years with some sudden changes have made that difficult for us. These are a list of some basic assumptions that went into the budget. As you flip through the budget document, it is hard to tell exactly what some of these assumptions are. For those of you that are new to the state school fund, the state does budget on a biennial basis. So we are about to enter the second year of the current funding. The state school fund for 197 school districts and the ESDs is at $9.3 billion for this 2-year cycle, which is approximately $300 million short of what is calculated as the current service level. So that's caused a problem. Just for reference, the funding level for the 1921 biennium was $9 billion. But as you may recall, for those of you that were on the committee last year, we were sitting here waiting for the legislative session to end and they were talking about 9.1 billion. So at least they did increase that to 9.3 when all was said and done. The thing that's really hit us the hardest through the pandemic is the loss of 400 plus students in our district, including the charter schools. So 10 to 11%, and that number's been fluctuating this year, but we budgeted last year for about a 60% return of that enrollment loss of the 400 students. Of course, a year ago we were guessing as to which service model we would be in. Well, I am surprised. We've had some people return, but we've had other people potentially that have left, or we just didn't have as many kids due to a downturn in birth rates, those types of things. It's hard to know exactly what all the reasons are, but our net gain is 0 this year. So we are budgeting for 22-23 forward with this as our new reality, because that's the best information we have right now. Last year we didn't know. I can tell you, for example, there's an enrollment sheet and there's a slide that'll be coming up in the back of your notebook, and I've been sharing this with the board each month. By school, by grade, compares the benchmarks to June of 2020, June of 2021, and to the current month. And as you probably already know, every school is a little bit different. Every school had at least a slight impact. Many schools had a major impact, as much as a 20% enrollment loss in some cases. Some schools are back right where they were, others are not. I can tell you that Robert Frost and Mark Twain, for example, back when they were full, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 750 students between the two schools. Today there's about 600. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces with that. Leslie was the principal at Robert Frost at the time, and she already knew there was going to be a downturn in town. Well, of course, as the pandemic started, we were also looking at the reconfiguration. So we are in the first year of the reconfiguration to having both schools as K-5s. But this all happened during the pandemic. So, how much of the decrease is due to the natural downturn that we saw coming there versus the pandemic versus reconfiguration? We don't truly know the answer to that as far as how much to attribute to each category. And then we have some assumptions there about ending fund balance and employee cost. We are just starting our bargaining process with the teachers union. We do have a contract in place with the classified association heading into next year. We do project that our ending fund balance will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.3 to $2.6 million. We did end fiscal year 2021 with a balance of just over $2.7 million. So that was about 6% of our general fund resources. This is a graphic I created last year that actually, I've made some new notes here, but it actually kind of mirrors the funding cliff graphic that we showed during Scott's superintendent's budget message. But essentially, while the state school fund appropriation has gone up, because our enrollment has gone down, our general fund resources aren't necessarily going up. They're kind of flatlined. It will go up next year despite the decreased enrollment, because the state funds the second year of the biennium at 51% and the first year at 49%. So, but expenditures continue to increase, and revenue's really not keeping up the pace, so therefore you have the gap. So if it had not been for the federal ESSER dollars, which between the 3 stimulus plans, the district received $5.2 million. Now, they don't give that to us in advance, it's in arrears. And I did do a ESSER expenditure report to the board here a couple of months ago. I'll post that on the board book as well if you haven't seen that. So that has really been a lifeline for most districts in the state, because most districts in the state are also dealing with enrollment decline. So at 10% enrollment decline at 400 students, state school funding this year is about $9,500 or $9,600 per ADMW. ADM stands for Average Daily Membership, and so if a student misses one day of school, it doesn't mean that we don't get the funding for them. They have to miss school for 10 days before they're required to come off of the membership. And schools also get additional weighting for special education students, for English language learners. There's some poverty ratio in there. So where we used to be a district of between 3,900 and 4,000 students, our weighted membership was close to 4,600. So you would take that amount times the amount per ADMW, which is over $9,000, and that's how you calculate what we get for total formula revenue. So if you just give a simple example of 400 students at $9,000, that's a $3.6 million hole. Now, if we were going through enrollment loss all by ourselves, that would truly be our deficit. Board members, I'm sorry, I know you've heard this about 10 times already. However, since most school districts in the state are down anywhere from 3 to 10%, statewide enrollment is down at least 30,000 students. So what's happened is the amount per student this year has gone from about 9,200 per ADMW to about 9,600 per ADMW. So it's kind of simple. We're down 400 students, but the amount per ADMW has gone up $400. So what starts as about a $3.6+ million hole nets back down to about a $2 million hole in terms of what we would have had coming to us had we not lost those students. So here is a history, an 8-year history of our general fund, ending fund balance. You can see in 2013-14 we were just pulling out of the recession, and I believe the number before that was even lower than the 2.9 million. And then we slowly built up the reserves and stayed at a 10% plus level. I think we may have hit about 13% there at the cap back in 2017-18. So the pandemic, so even before the pandemic hit, we made some investments, and I have a slide on that as far as why we saw a decrease. Some of this is due to the pandemic. Some of it's due to other decisions that were made even before the pandemic. So again, we've had a hard time keeping up with the current service level based on what the state has decided to fund schools with. But we also, back in January of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, we settled with the Teachers Association for 3 years, and this is the last year of that agreement. And we needed to catch up a little bit on our salary schedule, so we knew that we were going to impact the ending fund balance a little bit there due to that. But we also did more building projects. We had invested in some additional counseling at the K-8 level, and then the pandemic hit. So all of a sudden, our ending fund balance basically was cut in half. Here's the slide I referred to about enrollment. There is a graph for you that looks just like this in the back of your notebook and is posted every month for the board meetings as well. And there's a virtual link for you to look at that more closely, but pretty much tells the story. What I didn't say was, Silverfalls School District has been a district for 20 plus years at least that has been blessed to be a stable to slightly growing enrollment district. A lot of schools haven't had that situation, but the pandemic changed everything. This is a 6-year history on general fund resources. I want to make a note that this current year, 21-22, is skewed. The reason for that is because of the pension obligation bond that we entered into in September, which actually required a resolution of the board to increase general fund resources and requirements for the $35 million bond. We went in with 22 other school districts back in September to do a pension obligation bond and pay off our unfunded liability with PERS. We talked quite a bit about that. We have a lot of schedules for it, but essentially, we're saving about $700,000 this year in PERS costs because we entered into that. Now, future savings does depend on future investment performance over the 20 years, but this is an action that the school district did back in 2003 and 2004, and we're definitely, over that 18-year period of time, have saved quite a bit of money. So, so that working budget pulled this out of forecast 5. They won't allow me to change that and show apples to apples. In your budget document, the column for the budget for 21-22 is the adopted budget. This additional $35 million for this, the resources that came in and were essentially paid to PERS, is part of our adopted budget as amended, or our current working budget. So to make things easier to compare from the 22-23 versus 22-21, that's not reflected in there. Same thing on the expenditure side there. But you get a flavor of, you know, by object level, you can see, you know, how much is in salaries versus, you know, benefits, and if you add those two up, you know, typically we're 80% or 85%, you know, people in terms of our expenditures. Scott already showed this, but this is the graphic that we didn't actually create. It's a statewide graphic, but it's probably a little bit better than the one I did. But you can just kind of see what happens there. We're starting to walk closer to the cliff, but we do still have ESSER funds as we head into 22-23, but it'll be gone after that. And, you know, even more so than in past years, these other funding sources have really played a much more significant role in our budget. So we've always had the federal title program dollars, which Title 1A is centered around poverty. We have 4 Title 1A schools. IDEA, which is for additional special education resources, and some other federal and state programs. But between the addition of the student investment account and Measure 98 here, Measure 98's now been around for about 5 years. Student investment account, this is the second year this year, but the first year has been fully funded, has played a major role. I just wanted to state too that these stars are right-sized for their amounts, by the way, and you'll see some amounts plugged in a little bit later when Leslie talks. But the ESSER funds, I wanted to note, are embedded within the general fund. So it's so intertwined within the operations and the sustainability of the operations that it's within the general fund. All of these other funds are in Fund 200. So this is just a visual of how much things have changed just in the last 3 years. So when you go back to 2019-20, when you take general fund revenue, Fund 100, and Fund 2XX, which really is all the special revenue funds except for the food service fund and the student services fund, which is really just kind of that's Fund 270, which is student fees, extracurricular fees, and so on that come in through the schools and then get paid out. That's just kind of an in and out. It's not really an operating fund. So when you take those out of the mix and you add up the total revenue for all the rest of the 200 funds in the general fund, the 200 funds were providing just 6% of the total revenue in those two funds, whereas now we're up to 13%. This is just a screen snip of one of the first pages of your actual proposed budget document is a description of all the funds that are at play in the 200 series, and it really gives a good example or provides you some good information as to what those funds can be used for. The reason they're called special revenue funds is because they're designated for a specific purpose. I just want to remind you that there are several additional links that aren't in your hard copy notebooks that I think provide very good background, and I don't expect you to read them all, but I just want you and for everyone watching out there in the virtual world, please, this is always available to come back to at any time. The enrollment sheet, the most recent general fund financial statement, and our complete audit documents from last year. That one labeled revenue and expense summary is really a good one to look at. There's not a lot of pages, there's a lot of detail, but it shows exactly by fund, function, and object where all the money was spent last year. In addition, we did just have a Moody's credit rating update in March, and I believe this is an extremely informative report on the status of our district, why they actually downgraded us one tick. It has to do with ending fund balance and enrollment, but it provides a wonderful background, not just on our school district, but our community in general. And last but not least, now if you really, really, really want to get a little more nerdy here, the Program Budget and Accounting Manual. It's also known as the PBAM. All right, for accounting nerds, it's the chart of accounts. But when you look through the budget, you'll see headers for the functions or the programs within the funds. And those give you names. 1111 is elementary instruction, K through 5. 2310 is the board of directors. Anything that begins with a 1 is an instructional service. Anything that begins with a 2 is a support service. Could be counseling, could be transportation, it could be office of the principal, school psychologists. Support service is defined as people that are supporting the people that provide the direct instruction. So there's some good definitions as to what the functions are. So when you're looking through it and you see a name and you're not maybe, it's fairly self-explanatory with most functions, but other functions, there's a lot of things that go into it. The objects are easy. One, objects that begin with a 1 is a salary or a wage. 2 is a benefit. 3 is a purchase service. 4 is supplies. 6 are other objects, which are mostly dues and fees, and then our insurance premiums. So that provides you some good definition if you care to look at it. And that is standard across the board for all 197 school districts, and is something we have to follow. So hopefully that is helpful for you. With that, sorry to bore you, I'm going to pass it off to Leslie Roach, our Director of Teaching and Learning. She's going to talk more about the programmatic elements within the special revenue funds.
I believe Steve is the sun and I am the stars of the solar system. Is that the illustration? So, good evening. I'll be sharing this evening on behalf of both teaching and learning departments as well as human resources department. Dan Bush isn't here with us this evening, but he'll be at our next budget committee.
Hard to hear her.
Daniel, can you turn my microphone on? Testing. Testing.
Not getting better.
Testing. Astrid, is that better?
Not really.
Yeah, your mic must not be on at all.
We're moving to get another microphone, Astrid.
Steve's mic was awesome.
Testing.
No change.
Testing.
We'll just have you use the
Yeah, just use Steve's.
Okay. Still doesn't sound on to me. Good? Okay.
Yep.
Here we go. So the next slide is just again from the human resources lens, 10% loss of enrollment down students. You've heard the example of Robert Frost and Mark Twain. A few years ago when I was a principal at Robert Frost, we shared 750 students total, and now those two schools are at 600. So putting our our staff together. Sometimes for human resources, it's like putting the puzzle pieces together. As our staff naturally retires or relocates, or moves on to other exciting adventures, we have been really partnering closely with principals to make fiscally responsible decisions so that we can still serve our students the best way that we can, while also not posting and hiring and refilling all of those positions. So just over the course of the last few years during COVID, we've had natural attrition of staff, and we haven't refilled those positions, which is both Scott and Steve have shared in the past. And that's really due to Dan partnering closely with principals. Next slide. Investments in standardization. So we have been using our special revenue funds to invest in some standardization across the district. One example of this funding is called a PEAK grant, PEAK 8 grant, that comes through the Oregon Department of Education that helps to fund physical education teachers to help meet the required minutes of PE instruction every week. So we've been utilizing this grant, and we're able to increase it and offer PE at all of our schools next year, which is the first, to my knowledge, that we've been able to have a PE teacher at every school. Another example, I'm really excited to share preview information with all of you that our K-8 music work group that formed is preparing to present to the school board in June their final recommendation, and we currently have 3 music positions posted using student investment account dollars to have music taught at all of our schools. So this came out of our K-8 listening sessions that Scott was telling you about earlier. And then we had a work group that worked all spring and summer, and they're working on finalizing their final recommendations. And that's one of them, is that to really invest in a well-rounded education for all of our students, no matter what school they're at. Technology is another one we've been really working to standardize. During COVID, of course, all of our students needed access to technology really rapidly, and so we invested heavily in devices and getting all of our students access to one-to-one devices, and now we're at the point where we're able to maintain that, and each school and community is able to access devices as they need or desire in their education. Moving on to major programs. So these are the Fund 2XX. The student investment account is $3.2 million, and this is a huge investment in our district. We've been able to open our therapeutic program, Sequoia Falls Academy, which currently is serving about 60 students, grades 8 to 12. And it's functioning. It's all of our students in our district who attend any of our schools in those grades, and they're able to come together in a therapeutic setting and have counseling, social workers, teachers, family therapy, so lots of services on site to support students who are needing extra support in our community. We're also using our SIA funds to fund social workers district-wide, counselors. We funded a bilingual community liaison position this year, and created a welcome center at the district office so that families who speak Spanish are able to come and find someone who speaks that language and help them with school paperwork or finding community resources. We've been spending a lot of our SIA funds with our work around implementing a guaranteed and viable curriculum with all of our teachers. This year we are also finalizing our purchase of new language arts materials for all of our students, grades kindergarten through 5th grade. So that's what we spent just this year of the student investment account of that $3.2 million, and we'll have that money again next year. And so we continue to seek out community feedback around how to support our students and spend that money wisely. Measure 98 high school success is about $1 million, and that's funds that our high school is using. A lot of it is supporting career and technical education opportunities for our students, and also transitioning our students from our middle schools to the high school. And so that's a big move from going to a middle school to a high school and what high school is all about, earning credits and earning certain grades in classes in order to earn those credits, and there's just lots of differences. And so really focusing in on what that takes and how that can be successful. This year we've also spent about $250,000 out of our Preschool Promise grant, and that has been one classroom of preschool students this year in our school district. And we're really excited about this grant that ODE is offering and looking to expand so that we can have preschool at all of our schools and our preschool age kids can be a part of our school. The preschool is currently moving, we're so excited, on site into one of our buildings. It was in a neighborhood church and we're very thankful for their generosity. And next year it will be at Mark Twain Elementary School. So we're very excited about that. So we also have several federal funding sources, federal title programs, and IDEA special education services. Our title programs support our new teacher mentors, mentors for our new administrators, professional development. They fund intervention materials and intervention staff. And IDEA is for our special education services. And we have seen an increase of our special education students. We've been coming out of COVID, we weren't able to perform assessments for students who were needing services when we were remote. And so we had a boatload of assessments waiting for us when we all came back in person. So those have all been happening. And finally, for the second year, the state is funding summer learning opportunities. And so that's about $622,000. So it's a lot of money to spend this summer to support our students. For high school students, it's solely focused on credit recovery to really support them to earn credits to stay on track for graduating. And for our elementary and middle school students, it's a great opportunity for enrichment, social emotional learning, and helping transition students to school for the first time. We have a lot of kindergarten jump starts happening. So our new kindergarten students are able to come to school early in the summer and get to know their teachers. So that grand total of $6.3 million from all of those funding sources are definitely impacting our funding solar system. We have been able to be creative with our special funding sources to meet our students and communities' needs. The listening sessions at the K-8s this fall were just so meaningful and engaging for us and for our community, and we're so excited with the information we received from those, and we formed a superintendent's work group out of that. That we are hosting one at Mark Twain and Robert Frost in May, and then moving on to the middle school and the high school in the fall. So those were really great from the teaching and learning perspective because I got feedback from parents around instruction as well as, of course, our facilities. So ongoing community engagement and feedback is really helpful as we're spending these special revenue sources wisely. We continue to recognize and honor the uniqueness of all of our school communities, and our ultimate goal always comes back to our focus that students are on track to graduate, that they have the social emotional learning to navigate their world, and that our facilities reflect our love and respect for our students. And we're all using that lens as we make these fiscally responsible decisions. Thank you, and it's back to Steve.
Thanks, Leslie. Really appreciate that. That helps a great deal. There's a lot of moving parts there. And of course, with that comes a lot of reporting to the state as well. But it's exciting to be able to have those opportunities to be able to enhance programs and services for the students. We're almost done here, and then we'll turn it over to you. But just real quick, wanted to just walk through the actual budget document very quickly. If you turn to the tab in your notebook called Budget, it starts with the funding description page that I referred to earlier, and provides a good foundation as you review the budget. Then we start at a 30,000 foot level with proposed budget resources for each fund. with last year's budget and 2 years' actual history, as well as then the next page, the requirements or the expenditures. And then once you get past that page, you'll see many pages worth of detailed resource information for each fund, starting with the general fund, and it just follows each fund numerically through. Again, in that same format, but with more detail. And then once you get to page 28, you'll start getting into the expenditures. So starting with the general fund, which will be your longest section, of course. So again, just starting with the first major program, which would be elementary K-5 programs, which is represented by function 1111, and you'll see the format goes through each major object area, but there's sub-objects in there to help you understand how it's broken out between regular salaries versus, say, non-permanent salaries, which used to be where our substitutes were, but now it's more temporary workers. You see that come into play within our extracurricular for off-staff coaches, and then 130 series, which would be for extra duty work and those types of things. But the major salary line items would be licensed, classified, administrative salaries in the 110 series. And then anything, again, that begins with a 2, you can see are the benefit costs. And you'll see it broken down by PERS, Social Security, other, which would be workers' comp. And then the 250 series is where the health insurance comes into play. And then purchase services, supplies, and other objects. So you'll see that layout of objects for every major, every function throughout the budget. So, and then when you get to the break between the 1000 and the 2000 series, you will see a major function total for instructional services and support services. The one thing I want to say is you compare columns, this is probably the most, I would say, apples and oranges we've seen from current year compared to prior years, because if you go back to the 1920 actual column, the pandemic began for the last 4 months of that year, and some things started changing. And then of course, if you tried to compare actual column 2021 to budget 21-22 or budget 22-23, there's going to be quite a bit of difference there, because we were, of course, in the virtual world model, in most of 21-22. So you'll see things like transportation costs that were quite low, for example, that will really jump out at you. Some of those things, they just kind of answer themselves, but that's part of the reason we do this, is so that you can ask those questions both in a meeting like this, as well as providing some extra time in the coffee hours to dig even deeper. Emails welcome as well. We'll address any questions that come in there, publicly and through the coffee hour. We can address in the next meeting, but I also intend to put a Q&A document in the final adopted budget that will address any questions that were asked, so that any member of the public could see answers to questions that were asked throughout this process as well. So hopefully that helps. You'll go through the general fund, and then you'll start to get to the other funds. And yeah, so I know there's quite a few pages. When you get to the 200 series and beyond, it's rolled up a little bit compared to the general fund, because we're already at 100 pages, but it still provides quite a bit of detail. So that is really all I wanted to say about the format. And at this point, Chairman Plummer, I'd like to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie, Steve, Scott, for those presentations. And, I guess just some quick feedback. We're here for this, so don't feel, boring or taking time. This is what we signed up for. So, and I think especially as you can expand on some of the concepts that are found within the budget, it just helps us understand that much more. All right, so public comment. If you would like to speak during public comment and are attending virtually, please email Debbie at veloff_Debbie@silverfalls.k12.or.us. Hurry up and do that. We will also turn on the raise hand feature on Zoom as an additional option. If you are attending in person, which guess we can check behind the shelves. Please approach the public comment table located in front of the board. You seeing anything, Debbie?
There are no raised hands.
Okay, no raised hands. All right. So moving right along, questions and discussions. Is this basically just open it up? All right. Any questions? Any discussion topics?
Well, I've got one. Mine's for Steve. I think it's for Steve anyway. The question, I guess, goes something like this. So pre-COVID, we had some planned amount of staffing, teachers, administrators, central office, et cetera. I didn't see a chart up here that says, here's what it was before, here's what it is now. So do you have anything like that?
It's on the
Well, there is FTE in this budget document, but it's not broken up in capital. So that's certainly something that we can get between now and next year, absolutely.
I've been piecing through, and I do see some general things. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything in the weeds, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too, because I know you mentioned that, we had gone through a bit of a right sizing, which I think is an appropriate term given our 10% decrease in enrollment. So if we could just see a Reader's Digest of, the FTE maybe broken down by building, administrative, also maybe at the district office, I think that'd be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Leslie, you mentioned the preschool. I missed where that funding is coming from.
It's a preschool promise grant through the Early Learning Division section of the Oregon Department of Education.
Okay, so it's Oregon funds.
I have a question for Steve, when you have a second. Where in the budget might we see maintenance costs reflected? Facilities maintenance?
Yes, it's function, the 254 series, 2540, 2543, there's a few different functions in there. So let me get the page order here. So specifically on page 52 and 53
Okay,
would be the maintenance area there. So
got it.
you can see total staff and FTE there, as well as the large line item is the 320 series property services. And you can see that total has jumped up. We do have more projects planned. Obviously, they're most the deferred maintenance. And I do plan on bringing a list of those to the next meeting.
Okay.
We would typically cover those. Also included in there are utility costs as well. All the utility costs. So there's some normal operating costs, as well as the object 322 is included in there, which is contracted labor.
Okay.
We've also seen an uptick, I'm sorry, Robin, there's a function, all of our substitute costs, this transitioned a few years ago, you may recall. Substitutes used to come in the payroll costs, temporary labor, the 1-2 series. We've contracted the last 3 years with a company called EduStaff, which is through a partnership with the Willamette ESD. So we don't deal with paying substitutes out of our payroll, so therefore now it's a purchase service that is in this for maintenance. The 320 series, 321 is for cleaning services. We've had to contract for some of that labor, we haven't been able to keep some positions filled. So that's another reason for that increase there. But so there's a number of things that fit into the 320 series. I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right.
I was just going to ask, with the deferred maintenance list that you were just talking about, you guys have done a really good job, I think, of bringing the bond forward and sort of getting that out into especially archaic communities.
Yeah.
So having an upgrade list with the deferred maintenance list and sort of really being transparent, I think helps a lot in that area.
Yeah, I have a report that I did 2 or 3 years ago in this committee that we've been working on updating the board with that we haven't completed, but I would like to present that at our next budget committee meeting. It's by school with regular maintenance costs, but also a list of the projects that have been done over the last 5 years, including schools that have benefited from the seismic grants. So yes, we'll definitely do that.
So, kind of a theme that I'm hearing and certainly aligns with an interest of mine is just better understanding a per facility breakdown, similar to like how we have the 2 charter schools in here, just kind of getting a look that way, both of, salaries, operations, I think the deferred projects, that sort of stuff.
Right.
I think would be excellent.
We do have a new, again, this will be something that we'll present at the next meeting, but I think Wally could attest, and Robin and Tom, that there used to be budget committee meetings, 2 or 3 meetings for 7 to 10 hours, and you might have one principal up at the mic for an hour talking about, $400 supply budget. And so, in a lot of the locational conversation in a budget committee meeting, I think this stemmed from unification, to be quite honest, and kind of holding on to that methodology of the budget. Now, every school still has a certain amount of resources, but we're trying to get to the point where, really the schools are the funding for instructional, for teaching staff and instructional age. Leslie talked about standardization earlier. We kind of have a student-to-teacher ratio, and really that existed before, but it was kind of dollar focused, and really it's just how much FTE do you get for, X amount of students. And so that hasn't really changed, but we've tried to kind of pull away from getting so focused on each school's budget worksheet, because the other thing that got lost in the conversation was there's so many resources that are being pushed in that weren't even part of the school's allocation. For example, 4 schools are Title I schools, so those are additional resources that are being pushed in because they're a title school and they have to go to those schools. Well, that's meeting students' needs because there's a higher poverty level there. Also, the special education department, which has the most staff of any department in the entire district, those staff are being pushed in based on the number of IEP students that are at those schools. So by having, 85% of the budget committee process focused on one school's general fund budget, which didn't take into account any of these other resources, we've tried to transition a little bit there and keep the focus of the conversation around a little bit of the bigger picture, but we'll provide any details that are asked for, of course. And so one thing that we continue to do is provide profile sheets of each school. And last year, I think we provided that between the first and the second meeting. So those continue to be helpful and I believe are necessary, and so we'll provide those as well.
So Steve, I really appreciate that explanation. And what advice do you have for us using the document we have in front of us to look at that FTE number that's right in the middle of the page there?
Yeah, it is important to see. I've been working on this year a one-page, how we used to have the school-by-school allocation, and it was all about, it was all associated with dollars. And again, it didn't take into account the other resources that were pushed in. I've worked to convert it into that just FTE, instructional FTE, licensed specialists, like counselors or school psychologists, Title I FTE, and then classified FTE by school, and then take a ratio at the end. And so as far as the number of teachers per KDMW, and show the weighted, not just the enrollment, but the weighted at each school. And so I will provide, so we kind of developed it to see, you know, we want it to be easy to follow. We've kind of matched it up to where we are today, and I was working to get it converted to our budget outputs here, but ran out of time to get it for this meeting, but it is something I plan on presenting at the next meeting. But I think, you know, to start at kind of a non-locational view of the budget and look at program areas first. And so, yeah, if you're able to, Jennifer, able to look at just the total dollars and the FTE by program, it allows us to say, well, how much are we spending at the K-5 level? That was never part of the conversation years ago. You know, it was always about, well, what about this school and that school, which that's important, but I think it's important to start at this 5,000 to 10,000 foot level, and then, okay, we want some more information. Absolutely, you know. So the other thing I was going to say about the differences between, say, if you look at, and you'll see this in every program category. For example, if you look at page 28 and look at 210 Public Employee Retirement System. Now this category includes 4 objects. So 211 is our employer contribution to PERS, 212 is the PERS pickup, 213 is our first round of PERS bond, pension obligation bond, and 214 is our second round. All of that combines into 210. If you look at actuals 2021, you can see we had $1,564,000. Budget for 21-22 was 1.4 million, and you can see budget for 22-23 on about the same amount of salary is $1.2 million. The reason for that is because when I budgeted last year, I didn't budget as if we were going to enter into that new pension obligation bond because we didn't know. It happened in September, so I wanted to budget conservatively. We did enter that, and we are saving money, so the actuals for 21-22 will come in lower across the board for that Object 210 in all program areas, and now we've budgeted for that savings in 22-23. I can say that over the course of the 2-year biennium, we are going to save close to $2 million in PERS costs. 1, because the rates came down a little bit, and 2, because of the pension obligation bond. So I went on a rabbit trail there, but I meant to point that out as something that you'll see throughout the budget document when you do that comparison.
Thank you, and I appreciate all that work.
You bet. Yeah.
I encourage the rabbit trails.
All right.
Yeah, it was a good explanation. I always liked the school-by-school breakdown because it was bite-sized, you could consume it easily, but you gave a great explanation why we need to look at both, and I look forward to the other one as well.
You bet. Thanks, Ward.
And it was something that some friends had shared with me was the initial look at this was just a lot of numbers. And, you know, I think with my experience in the past with looking at, you know, other district budgets and, you know, just looking at other school districts throughout the state, understanding, you know, the packet and the narratives that come with it. But I feel like the presentations tonight filled that hole. And so, you know, extremely helpful there. You know, I think maybe just the consideration of having those as part of the packet in some form.
Yeah.
If you were looking for more to do.
Yes, no, I understand what you're saying, and really the presentation is really part of the budget that will be part of the supplementary information and the adopted budget. And I wish I could have provided it a little sooner, but I was working on that still up to today. Last year, the last 2 years, I know it was our goal to provide the actual budget document close to a week in advance, but we weren't able to deliver that this year, but that's on me. So, yeah, something that I'd like to get back to.
But do you want to emphasize that the presentation between Leslie and you, yeah, that was, I think, what people were looking for.
Yeah.
So it was delivered just in a different form.
Yeah, and I appreciate the feedback. This document is definitely, you have to like numbers to, but as far as the proposed budget document, it is the state required layout in terms of the columns to have the 2 years actual, last year's budget and this year's adopted. But you're right, you don't really get the story, and that's what the presentation is meant to do.
And I do appreciate that you're gonna put it on board book tomorrow, that's excellent. And I know Daniel will probably get this video up
Yeah,
really quickly. so
absolutely.
we
That's the
can
nice
spread
thing about the
word.
video is we can always go back and anybody can go back and watch it at any time. That's very helpful. So I know that, this document, again, is long and questions will come out as we go through the next month. And so, more questions tonight, absolutely, but, feel free to send emails with questions and ask at any time. And obviously, we'll have more information with regards to the schools, maintenance at the next meeting as well. So we'll have more to give as we go through the process for sure.
I've got a question. It's kind of a nit, but I'm just curious. So there's a big shift between 1220 and 1250. What was the motivation for that?
We were, see, that's part of it too, like, well, I want to say what, just things that are, that are gonna, you'll point out some things that'll come out, but I always kind of hope, hey, somebody's gonna ask that question, right? Like, I'm waiting for it. So, so 1220 and 1250, that's all within special education. That's the primary special education functions. 1220 is for more restrictive programs, and 1250 is for less restrictive programs. We found out as we were building this budget that many of the personnel, both licensed special eds support and our special needs assistants, were not categorized in the proper function. So we had to reorganize. So if you were to add up the 1220 and the 1250 as a total, you'll see it's not too much different. You'll also see in so in the Fund 200, there's actually quite a bit of change too. If you looked at the fund description sheet, every grant, with the exception of the food service fund in 210, was kind of rolled into 200, which is really just the parent fund. So ODE has changed some things. And so all state grants, and you'll see those listed out on your list, are in the 25X series. So 251 is a statewide designated fund for student investment account. 252 is Measure 98. All federal grants now are in 201, so that would be your title programs and IDEA. IDEA stands for Individuals with Disability and Education Act. And again, we've had those funds for quite some time. Kim has helped reorganize some of those splits between the general fund and IDEA. Some are split into both funds, and so we've been able to kind of just shift licensed into that. That certainly doesn't cover all of our license, but we get about $600,000 in IDEA that helps support our special education needs. So you'll also see 1220 or 1250 reflected in Fund 201, and that's with our IDEA funds. But there was some reorganization there to get those classified correctly, so that's why it looks different. Great question.
Steve, can you help me out? What, can you define the more restrictive and less restrictive that you referred to earlier?
Kim, I told you I wouldn't turn to you if I didn't. Maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Our wonderful friend, the PBAM, the Program Budgeting and Accounting Manual, defines it, but the 1220 is a program in which children spend their entire day in a restricted setting, whereas 1250 programs are for students that may come in and out of
Okay.
a program. So our learning resource centers, where those students may spend 2 or 3 periods, or not always periods at the younger grades, but they may spend a portion of their day in a more supportive environment and then be able to be integrated into some of the other settings.
Okay, thank you. It's a new term for me.
Yes.
I guess I'm curious, so there's a target to be at the 10% general fund target by June 2025. Is attrition enough? Are you on track? Like, where are you on track? I know the number was there, but.
No, certainly, I mean, that's helping us kind of right size our, staffing based on enrollment. We're probably still slightly overstaffed in some areas, but that helps us address some unfinished learning with ESSER dollars, but there will still have to be some adjustments. That just certainly helps us downsize a little bit without actually having to lay anybody off, just because there's so much turnover. In fact, I would say turnover is probably at least double what it usually is this time of year, for various reasons. People are asking to be on leave, or to have a year's leave, or people are just moving on for various reasons, and so that's become a little bit more standard, not just in our district, but sad to see some people go, but each time an opening arises, you kind of look at, for example, the high school has 3 math openings right now, but for the first time since I've been here, the high school is below 1,200 students. It used to be above 1,300, and it's slowly come down, not just pandemic, even before that. So will we hire 3 right now? Probably not. It might be 2, but we're even having a hard time finding 2. Is that an accurate statement?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. So as far as your question on the ending fund balance, I think no, there'll have to be other moves, especially with ESSER funds going away. The thing that we do have that may or may not help us as we wrap back around to next year, they'll be in the legislative session again, and they'll be talking about what's the funding level going to be. They didn't increase the state school funding as much as many people thought this last go around, and I think that they're going to have to do better. But even though the state reserves are at an all-time high with the recent developments in the economy, it's hard to say what the situation is going to be a year from now. We also know PERS rates are reset every 2 years. So this upcoming September, end of September, the PERS board will adopt new PERS rates, which we do expect to go up. So we've gotten a bit of a break with PERS costs this biennium, and then we've got the ESSER dollars that have helped us. But those factors will change in 2 years. So, there's just always a lot of moving pieces, and no, I don't see how we would be able to immediately, be able to get back to the 10%. Now, with that being said, I know we've talked about this a little bit with Janet and Jonathan. We have a finance work group, which we haven't met for a few months here, but we think that they may recommend that policy be discussed at the board level, because there hasn't been a discussion. A lot of districts tend to have their reserve policies at about 8%, and so that could be a discussion as well. But don't know where that may lead. But I think 8% is kind of, in my opinion, would be the absolute minimum target.
Glenn, I'm glad you asked that question, because I know we don't have a ton of impact on it right now, but that's where I get a little bit of heartburn on looking forward at the reserves and as a board of how we're going to move forward with that. And like Steve said, I think it's going to be multifactorial. It's not going to be not backfilling for attrition. You're going to hope the state school funding numbers increase. You're going to hope our enrollment comes back. You've seen it decrease. I think it was up at 5.1 million. Now it's down to 2.4. Is that million-ish? If I remember the numbers on the bar graphs. Even after you saw the far back after the recession, it took many, many years, and Wally, you probably remember those years on the board, and Tom too, that, you know, it took many years to get that back up, 6, 7, 8 years after some really hard financial times. So it's gonna take a lot of multifactorial approaches here, you know, whatever we can get in terms of extra grants, whatever we can do to, you know, to, like, you know, there's a couple $100,000 in savings on the obligation refunding, you know, that can go back into the reserves, hopefully, so to speak. But it's gonna be a multifactorial and multi-year project to get those reserves back up to a more comfortable level.
But the reserves are there to use during tough times.
That's why we have them,
That's why
yeah.
we put them in, and you can't be burning it during, we need to be building during good times and using it during bad times.
Praise the fiscal approach for many boards of years before for at least allowing us to have these reserves to use, especially at times like this. Thank God for that.
Hey, Steve, how is the state determining our population that they fund us for? Do they look back in the past 2 years? Or are they kind of having a hold harmless thing? Because what if 5% of our population shows up?
Well, I fought hard for that, and they didn't do it. I think they should have.
Okay.
So for those that may not know, the state school fund, we are funded for the current year's enrollment, or ADMW, or the prior year, whichever is higher. There is a hold harmless provision to give declining enrollment districts a year to adjust. So that did help us last year. So last year we saw the enrollment going down all year long to where it landed at -400. But we were funded based on our last year we were funded on our 2019-20 numbers. So this year, 21-22, was the first year that we felt the impact of the declining enrollment, because it was based on this year or last year, which were both bad. I was hoping that because of the unprecedented situation, that they would say this year's funding would be based on 21-22 versus 19-20, but they didn't do that. And then, you know, ESSER funds were really, quite honestly, not allocated, I don't think, in a responsible fashion. They allocated ESSER funds based on the Title I-A allocation method, which is all based on poverty. I have no problem with, obviously there's students that fell further behind than other students, but the issue that I saw there was there's about 13 allowable uses for ESSER spending, and some of those things don't have anything to do with poverty. It could be, you know, HVAC or just, you know, sustaining operations, for example. And the way that they funded it was based on ADMW, which already has, you know, poverty and special education built into the ADMW, and then they took the dollars and applied the Title I-A ratio to it. So it was kind of a double, I guess, positive for certain districts in terms of the ADMW. So there's neighbors that receive 4 times as much per student as we did for ESSER funds. I think for ESSER 3 specifically, which was the largest program, our total of the 3 pots was $5.2 million. ESSER 3 specifically was $3.2 million. $3.2 million equated to about $700 to $800 per ADMW for us. There are some districts that received $2,000 or $2,600 per ADMW in ESSER funds, and they don't even know how to spend it all. Ours will be gone next year, and you can spend ESSER $3 through September 30th, 2024. So I'm not trying to say that there's certain districts that needed more. I just think that they kind of doubled it up in terms of those factors, because it was, if they wanted to do the Title I-A formula, they should have just based it on raw enrollment and not ADMW, or based it on ADMW and then just taken the amount and said, well, we've got that factored in, but they did it both on both sides. So I hope that makes sense and doesn't sound insensitive in any way, but.
And it's good for the public to realize that too, so thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Steve, the ADMW numbers, it's based on October 1st enrollment, correct? Or does it fluctuate during the year?
It constantly fluctuates. We have 3 reporting periods. The first reporting period
October
is
1st.
indeed October 1st. And then we report 2 more times throughout the year. So the average daily membership weighted it's based on that average throughout the year, not just that one snapshot in time. It's based on what is our, is this not working? Oh, okay. I love this mic. It is based on, you know, the average over the course of the year. So they take those reporting periods, and it's just, you know, an average. You know,
Of those
they'll
3.
update the estimates based on that for all the districts.
So on a related note, you know, the budgeting assumption, we're hoping for the 50, right, to come back. That's just for rough numbers, 500,000. What's our backup plan?
Well, it would be, this budget doesn't use any additional reserves.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, we're using the rest of the ESSER funds, but that would be the backup plan.
Okay, thank you.
Did I understand right, when you mentioned there are exceptions for the 10 days out, is that well-known, or is that, like, the schools are aware of what the 10 days are, if they can apply for exceptions? Does that exist?
The 10-day rule, you mean, as far as
A
taking
student
a student
missing.
off the
Mhm.
membership? Exceptions? No, I don't think there's any
Okay.
Oh, because you were talking about during the pandemic.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I don't think that.
There aren't too many exceptions this year, but if you were home because of quarantine or COVID,
Right.
you were still counted as positive attendance.
Okay.
So that's the flexibility we have.
All right, anything else? So next on the agenda is subsequent meetings that is established, May 19th, I believe, and then some coffee break meetings, is it the 9th and 10th of May?
10th and 11th.
10th,
Yep.
11th, all right. Any other business or comments of future agenda items?
Well, I'll make sure and follow up with the additional information requested this evening, which some of that was already in the works, but I'm really glad that you brought those up. But my intention would be to get those posted out at least a week before the next meeting on the board book agenda for anyone to see, so that you can have time to look at the additional information prior to the next meeting.
Will you let us know when that gets posted?
Absolutely, I'll email everyone and let you know when it gets posted. Yep.
And would it be possible to get that on Parent Square or Facebook or some sort of notification for those that it's not already on their radar? Just to,
Absolutely, we could have Derek send
Mhm.
a parent
Yeah.
square message. Yep.
great.
That's a good point.
You know, the state calls for the local budget law, there's a notification of budget committee publication notice requirement, as well as for the budget hearing, which you see those things in the paper all the time, but in this day and age, those things don't get noticed too much, but that's the requirement, as well as the website. But I agree, Parent Square would be a good thing to add.
All right, if that's it,
Wow.
meeting adjourned, see you May 19th.
I could be late.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.